Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great Player. Well, continuing our series of exploring the different classes that are available to you as a player within the fantasy setting and specifically within Dungeons & Dragons, this week we look at the Ranger. Now the Ranger in my book is very similar to the Rogue in terms of the Strider complex. And we'll talk about the Strider complex a little bit later when we're looking at the negatives of this particular class. The Ranger, of course, is an individual who traditionally has inhabited the outlying areas of the countryside, the woodlands, the far-off marshes and plains, and generally is an outdoorsy type. Many moons ago, they tried to create all kinds of different types of rangers. There was even an urban ranger who lived within the city streets and worked in that space. But many of those things have been forgotten to past iterations of the role-playing world. So the Ranger is this individual who generally is armed with a bow, a long sword, a short sword, a dagger, doesn't wear very heavy armor, and moves around and about in a fairly silent manner, and could be looked at as being a rogue plus a druid mixed down into some kind of fighting class. So they're not a very specific class, they are a fringe class, not one of the core ones that you would look at normally, but they are a very interesting class because of that. So let's look at the merits of the class. They are what we would call a cool class. They're the guys who get to use almost all of the different types of weapons, range, two-weapon fighting style. They get to be ambidextrous. In the past, this was the only class you could actually take to be able to use two weapons. That subsequently changed in the recent rule settings. But they were always considered to be like the typical stealthy Clint Eastwood style individual who would survive on their own if there was an apocalypse and would do so with grit and determination and with very little joy in their lives. But they were a cool class, so they're a very, very cool character to play from that perspective. They're aloof, they're individualistic, they're solo operators, they're very capable to continue doing stuff on their own. Very, very dependable, reliable class. They can survive out in the wild very easily, generally speaking. Now, they are nature's eyes and ears, if you like. A druid, of course, is the ultimate naturalist, the ultimate protector of the wild, but the rangers are there as well, doing all sorts of rangery type things out there in the bushes and the trees. They're having fun whilst the druids are doing all the hard work. At least that's from the druid's perspective. So those are the merits of the class. Very versatile. You can use almost any weapon that you like. They can be range attack, they can be close attack, they can be multi-attack. They can have an animal companion. They can cast some spells as they get to higher levels that involve nature. So they're quite a broad character class that you can explore and focus on different areas as you choose. That, however, does lead us to the cons of the character, the negative. So we've had the pros, now we've got the cons. The negatives of the character are the fact that they are so independent, the fact that they are able to operate ideally on their own, tracking beasts, hunting, fishing, surviving out in the wild. They generally don't necessarily need the help of a party in order to carry on. It is mitigated a little bit because of their second negative. Their second negative is, as a result of the fact that they can do quite a lot of things, is that they're not very good at any one particular thing. And in particular, they're not very good at being a frontline fighter. They don't have the heavy armor of a cleric or an actual fighter. Yes, they're armed and they can do damage, but absorbing damage is not their forte. Their focus is more on being dexterous, being outside of combat, perhaps using a bow and arrow, some kind of archery, maybe engaging in melee if they absolutely have to. But they're not very good frontline fighters, generally speaking again. So by that, they need the support of the rest of their party in order to survive these major combats. They need to be able to move around the battlefield easily. So once they're bound and tied down, they're in the same problem that a rogue is in. Yes, they can do damage, but they can't absorb it very well. They also suffer from that Strider complex. Now, the Strider complex is the fact that you have this hooded figure mysteriously sitting in the inn, puffing away on their smoke, on their pipe, whilst watching the new players, the new characters coming into the inn. They are an isolationist figure. I can work on my own, I don't need you. The Strider complex is one that you as a ranger have to work against. You need to prove that you are part of the pack, not a solitary animal. Because the solitary animal, of course, means that you should be playing the game with the GM and nobody else. No party required. You need to have a party because you're playing in a social game, generally speaking, and so the social game requires you to interact with them. So you have to actively avoid the Strider complex and make sure that your ranger integrates with the rest of the party and learns to use their abilities and their powers to their advantage, as you would if they were your own. Now, the potential for the Ranger has, I think, some of the greatest potential out of all of the character classes, because they are so adaptable to their environment. They are so able to track, to hunt, to kill, to fight, to explore, etc. They have a very big range, a large range of things that they can do. They're a good support character. They're one of the best support characters that are out there. If you are a cleric, you have a ranger who can do ranged attacks. If you are a fighter, you have a second fighter standing next to you, or again, you have ranged attacks. Fighters don't have a lot of skills, the ranger does. Clerics don't have a lot of, clerics are a special class. Clerics have a lot of almost everything. Pomposity being part of it. So the pompous cleric has a ranger who will bring them down to earth. The wizard has someone who has the capacity to be buffed up and then go off and destroy the enemies. So the ranger can work well with almost any class, especially with rogues, where the stealth aspect of a ranger will complement the stealth aspect of the rogue. So the ranger really is one of the better support classes out there. Then they can replace several of the other classes. A good ranger could replace the rogue, could replace the druid, could replace the fighter for that matter. So a good ranger can step into almost any role. There are not a lot of other classes that can do that. So that's a strength of the ranger. And of course the ranger can be a decent leader type. Leaders don't have to necessarily be at the front of battle. They could be observing it and making calls based upon what they see. And the ranger is one of the best classes for that. Because if they have archery, they are standing back, they are looking at things, they're trying to analyze how things work, and then they can lead the party from that perspective. So the ranger has a lot of potential, a lot of really good, solid options available to this particular class. Now, the different types of ranger that you get are very, very varied. You have a scout. That is the ranger corps who moves with the army. They go ahead, they find things. Again, all of their skills, all of their abilities just lend themselves to that type of scouting. However, it's a longer term type of scouting than a rogue could possibly do. A rogue, it's a scout ahead of maybe 100 yards, no more than that. The rogue doesn't really have the capacity to live out on the wild. A scouting ranger could go on a scout for a week and live off of the land whilst they're busy scouting out that area. So that's a different type. It's a long-range scout rather than the short-range scout of the rogue. They can be a warden, a protector of a specific area, focused on this particular grove of trees or forest area or hill area. There is that warden type of aspect where they've given license to patrol a large area and bring wrongdoers to justice. A tracker is another option where they're not scouting ahead, they're moving with the party, but they're reading what's gone ahead, what's gone before them. They're reading what they're going to encounter. They're helping the party from that perspective. So a tracker is a very good option for a ranger. An interesting one is that there could be a bounty hunter. Bounty hunters by tradition are not thugs and they're not heavy duty, combat heavy individuals. They will track, they will set a trap, and they will catch their prey. The ranger is one of the most suited classes for bounty hunters because they have the skills that they need, they have the abilities that they need, they have the class features that they need in order to be a fantastic bounty hunter. They can be an archer as well. Fighters can be very good archers. Rangers, because of the fact that they can be an archer and then switch out to different weaponry as combat becomes close, makes them a little bit better, in my opinion. From a statistics point of view, of course, that's entirely a different story. So those are the different types that you can get as a ranger, and there are many others, and I'm sure you can list them below. Now, when we look at the story capacities of the rangers, there are, in my opinion, 4 that stand out really above, head and shoulders above anybody else. Traveling. Now, traveling is generally not a story. If you've got a bad GM, you'll travel from point A to point B. If you've got a terrible GM, you'll travel from point A to point B, having fought 1,400 different encounters because the random encounter dice said so. If you are playing with a good GM, the GM will throw in maybe 1 or 2 instances where you as the ranger will shine. The party gets disorientated in fog. The ranger has to figure out which way to go. The party has to cross rivers, swamps, different types of terrain. It's the ranger that should be leading the way with those survival checks and those kind of things. So the ranger really stands out in travel type of adventures. The ranger stands out against natural enemies. A pack of wolves has moved in. A giant bear is threatening a village. All of those kind of encounters, all of those natural-based spaces, again, the ranger is going to shine. Hunting and finding is primarily the goal of the ranger. They hunt, they find. They hunt to feed, they hunt enemies, they hunt to preserve themselves. Hunting and finding. Big, big, big story for rangers, and something that rangers should be very good at is that whole process of hunting and finding. And then finally, survival. Surviving, the airship has crashed in the middle of the mountains. Who's going to keep the party alive? Well, that will be the ranger primarily, unless there's a cleric, in which case they can create food and water. But the ranger will be the one who sets up the tents, who looks out for avalanches, who looks out for certain types of natural wildlife and plant life that's particularly dangerous. In short, I think the ranger is a fantastic class, a very versatile class, and I think a group of rangers would be a very indomitable force to have to try and deal with from the perspective of outdoors, survival, and that kind of thing. Where the ranger falls down is on the social skills, because they're generally out and about. It makes them a little bit less talkative, a little bit less inclined to negotiate and to be charismatic necessarily. Having said that, of course, those can change depending on your attributes. So the ranger I like very much. I don't play them very often because, well, I suppose I just haven't played very much. But I do enjoy playing with rangers, as they are so much fun and so versatile to play with. Until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of playing.